So as I was reading the latest stuff on the Dan Markel murder subreddit, I got to talking with a poster by the name of Kate M14, who posted a new thread today about a lie that she came across in Wendi Adelson's testimony, where Rashbaum asked Wendi on cross at the Charlie's trial if she had talked to Charlie that morning on July 18th, the morning of the murder, and Wendi firmly replied no. And Kate M14 noted in her post that what about the 18-minute call that Wendi had talked about where she called Charlie while the Geek Squad guy was at the house, or the text where she texted Charlie, "That's so sweet," which was later deleted. It's very weird and suggestive. There's a lot of different threads like this if you kind of dig around the Dan Markel murder. It's probably one of the more commonly asked questions is about Wendi and her immunity and all the different lies that people think that she's told, or just questions about whether or not she might get charged for perjury. It's a really good question, and I think there's a good reason why people are so interested in knowing more about it, and I am too. And I did go over Wendi's testimony in a previous video I did fairly recently on this channel, where I focused on the celebration dinner, which is the dinner where Wendi says she puked all over the table shortly after the murder, and what the hidden purpose of that celebration dinner might have been. Check out the video if you haven't seen it already. It gets into some of the things about how the story of the celebration dinner had some extra layers of importance besides just being a story that Wendi told in all three trials. I was just thinking of how you might go about organizing all of Wendi's testimony in a video, or just in a sort of in a resource. I like taking notes. I'm more than happy to sit through a whole trial and take pretty extensive notes with timestamps. And because Wendi has testified in 3 trials, I don't know, there's something about it that appeals to the collector in me, where you want to collect all of them. You're like, oh, what did Wendi say in KD1 versus KD2? It just presents all these curiosities, and because Wendi's such a bizarre witness, it just makes me want to examine it under a microscope. Like in some other Reddit thread, I was talking about how in the celebration video, that was kind of my instinct, is wanting to mount that piece of evidence on a slide. And so I was thinking it's another idea for a video. I just want to kind of try it out, see if it works, and if so, maybe it could become a series. The idea is, here's the bit, is we'll go through every question. This is pretty ambitious, and it reminds me of a definition of art that the great documentary filmmaker Errol Morris talked about one time in an interview that had to be 10 years ago in Vice magazine, where he said art is a series of rules that you set for yourself and then follow slavishly. Something like that. Let's see how close I get it, because I'm going to play the clip now after this, but that's always stuck with me because I think it's so brilliant. So this... Alright, so here's the clip. After the clip, we'll talk about what the video is going to be.
I have my own crazy definition of art, for what it's worth. Here's the definition. Set up a series of arbitrary rules and then follow them slavishly. So what are the arbitrary rules here?
Okay, it'd be funny to see how close I got to the quote. But so anyway, the series of rules that we're going to follow slavishly in this bit, in this project, are we're going to listen to all of Wendi's answers. We're going to catalog all of them. Every time Georgia asks Wendi a question, I'll put a timestamp, and then we'll evaluate all of Wendi's answers for how bullish they are, or did Wendi perjure herself or not. That's the bit that we're playing tonight here on the $60 bajillion question, or this whatever game show name we're going to come up with for the title. Huzzah! I'm way too excited about it's the match game. Did Wendi lie? Did Wendi lie?
Fabulous prizes may go to these people today if they know when the price is right. Betty Chapman, come on down!
So I've already got quite a few notes, and I'll tell you that this first episode of Did Wendi Lie, or whatever we're going to call it, might be kind of short. Because in KD1, the first trial, that's where we're going to start at the beginning. In the first trial, Wendi, let's see here, in my video, there's a law and crime chunk of an hour and 27 minutes, almost 28 minutes of Wendi testifying in the first trial, and I got 8 minutes in. And I have so many notes, and half of that time Wendi's not even on the stand. Wendi doesn't even start answering questions until 4 minutes and 32 seconds in, so it's really only 4 minutes of video, and I have an ungodly amount of I don't even know what the pages is because I'm in a pageless Google Doc, but it's a lot of scrolling to get to the bottom of this document that I have for 4 minutes of audio. Not even 4 minutes, 3.5 really. 8:05 is where I got on the time code. So 4:30 to 8:05. That's going to be episode 1. But there's a lot in there for a short amount of time. A lot of interesting stuff about the way that Georgia formulated her questions, and a lot about, I think that Wendi is very practiced as a witness, and so this little game that we're playing here can double as a way of sort of analyzing prepared witness testimony and when it's too prepared, and just sort of some of my comments as well on like the way that witnesses testify, because I have seen a lot of court cases in my day, worked on a lot of cases, so yeah, I don't know, I think I have a pretty decent sense for it, but anyway, all right, so yeah, hopefully we'll be able to answer, just by kind of, if nothing else, taking a second and pausing and really sort of focusing on the words and what she might be trying to do and what it really means. I think maybe we'll have a better idea at the end of what Wendi's exposure might be for perjury charges and why Georgia might have asked questions the way that she did, whether or not there's an issue with immunity and things. Is there subjects that Georgia seems to want to avoid? Those are the kind of questions that I'd like to ask with this. And I'd also like to have fun and, make some fun videos. So let's get started. So Katie number 1, first question out of the gate comes at 4 minutes and 32 seconds. And just right here at the top, when I say 4 minutes and 32 seconds, that timestamp, it's at the end of the question. So when Georgia stops talking and right as Wendi starts talking. So that's, I think, that's what I'm doing with my timestamps in this video. Okay. So timestamp number 1, 4 minutes and 32 seconds. The question is, basically, what is your name? And I think we'll just have to give it to Wendi on this one. I'll believe you. If you say your name is Wendi Adelson, that's fine with me. Okay. Question number 2. How many questions do you think we're going to get before I take issue with the veracity of what Wendi says? I'll give you a second to think. Pick a number, any number. How long do you think it'll be before Wendi tells a whopper? Okay, question number 2.
How are you employed, Miss Adelson?
I'm an attorney.
How are you employed? Wendi says simply that she's an attorney. It's so strange. The first thing I thought of when I saw this answer for this go around and watching the testimony is that at some point further down the road, she says something like she's an attorney by training. I remember her using that specific wording, which struck me as very like purposely vague and specific in a way that like is designed to be misleading. So it's just interesting to me thinking about the way that Wendi's answers seem to evolve over time. But the other thing that I immediately thought of when, Wendi starts giving a couple of these answers in this here testimony is that she seems to have an overriding strategy of trying to contribute to the record as little as possible. She just wants to minimize her exposure and just say as little as legally possible to not be considered total like the minimal viable acceptable answer is what it seems like she's trying to give. She wants this to be just barely shelf stable. Like she wants this to be just a hair more lips and asshole that this product needs to be labeled sausage and not dog food. That's where we're at here. This is it's all designed to be misleading or to give people zero information. Even though it's only seconds in at this point, we've only listened to like 8 seconds of testimony. There's already like an ocean of thoughts that came to me. Like it was almost like I felt like I should like skip some of it, but I want to fight that instinct. I want to actually instead kind of go deeper, because I think this is where you get to like the really interesting stuff, like all the different things that sort of flash through your head in that opening impression. We always say things like the opening impression is so valuable, and there's these well-known biases for like recency bias or the opening and closing bias, those sorts of things. And so I wanted to try to capture that. And one other thing that I noticed right away here, one of the nuances that struck me, is that right on the heels of that second answer, when Wendi answered simply that she's an attorney, it's very subtle, but there's a few different times where Georgia like says like little sort of filler words, like she said okay right after this, like okay, like it sounded like slightly exasperated, like all right, you're gonna make us do it the hard way then. gotcha. You know, it was like, I could almost hear George's mentality shifting gears a little bit. It was like, okay, this isn't going to just be, we're not getting Wendi the charmer, Wendi the, volunteer info to Detective Isom in the original police interview, like trying to like butter him up to make him think that you're not a bad guy. Instead, we're getting Wendi the victim here. We're getting Wendi like is going to fight you tooth and nail. Wendi, the person that was in a bitter, vicious custody dispute, divorce with Dan Markel. And so we're getting Wendi the litigant today. And George is like, okay, I guess we're going to have to do it that way.
How are you employed, Ms. Adelson?
I'm an attorney.
All right.
You can just sense so many things that are, might be worrying through George's head as she's figuring out on the fly how to deal with Wendi, this X factor in this whole trial. Because that's one other thing that maybe people that haven't had like a lot of interactions with the criminal justice system might not sense is that, I used to be like a witness victim coordinator paralegal in the criminal law office, and I can tell you that like, usually before you get to trial, you've had a lot of different interactions, or people from the office have had a lot of different interactions with the victims and witnesses in the trial, telling them, when dates are getting moved and just keeping them in the loop. And then before trial, a lot of times you'll meet with them to like, show them the lay of the land, what to expect, answer any questions they might have about the process. And also you talk to them a little bit about their testimony too, if you want to confirm certain facts or just, make sure, interview them, follow up on certain points. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on when you have a normal relationship between a victim and a witness and a prosecutor's office. So I guess what I'm saying is like Georgia already knows that whatever's happening here with Wendi is not normal. Wendi, after that first day, after she talked to Detective Isom and deployed her alibi and did all that she could to mitigate the initial suspicion of the police, like after that first day, she was out of there. She wasn't talking to George's office or cooperating or helping the police because, well, I think we all know why. Georgia knew what was going to happen, but it's like you could kind of just sense like Georgia was just sort of like, all right, yep, this is what's happening. This is how it's going to go. And also at this point, it's kind of interesting because the court reporter asked Wendi to sort of fix the microphone or pipe up a little bit. Or you see Wendi kind of fumbling with her mic, trying to make sure that she can be registered because she is kind of low in the mix at this point. Very robotic. Okay, question number 3. 4 minutes and 51 seconds in, Georgia asks, where were you employed in 2014? And very robotically, again, that's the word that brings to mind for me, is robotic. I was employed at FSU Law School. It's like there's never been a more obviously prepared and coached witness than Wendi.
All right. How were you employed back in 2014?
I was employed at FSU Law School.
Of Wendi in terms of like a focus group, like she would just melt the knob on the boo meter in a focus group setting, or people were watching her give an answer and evaluating her likability and trustworthiness and that sort of thing. I mean, she just comes off as seeming very fake and seeming like everybody's beneath her. She seems very, she struggles to hide her disgust. That's what I would say. Okay. Next question. 4 minutes and 57 seconds we get. Okay. Another okay. Soto voce from Georgia. And were you a member of the Florida Bar at that time? I love Georgia's twang. It's the perfect amount of a southern accent, in my opinion. And then we get from Wendi again, a minimally viable answer. I was, simply. Okay, so that's another... I'm going to give Wendi the benefit of the doubt of most of these, unless I say otherwise for the opening, because I mean, I don't want to take issue with the factual nature that she was a member of the bar in 2014. I guess she was. Well, you can look that up on a website. So that's the only time I'm going to believe her. I also kind of want to just mention here, is in a previous video that I did about the celebration dinner, I mentioned that I noticed that Wendi was mirroring Georgia's language a lot, and in that video I speculate about a hypothesis of mine that one of the reasons why she's mirroring Georgia is to reduce her linguistic footprint in the court record. The most obvious reason for mirroring somebody would be to establish a rapport, like an unconscious rapport, a subconscious rapport, where you mirror maybe their body language or accept their formulation for speech. And I think there might be some of that going on. Like Wendi is very good at charming people or manipulating them. But I think this also has like another purpose And I think that she's very purposeful. I think Wendi and her representatives thought through this a lot because it's such a huge gamble and something that could really affect her life if it went wrong. So Wendy's a valedictorian of her high school class. She is somebody that studies. So you bet your butt she prepared her ass off for this trial. Yeah, in my previous video, the celebration dinner, I get into a little bit more just like why I think Wendi is so willing in certain points to accept Georgia's formulation, because she doesn't want to, it's just better for her, and it gives the people less info. If she doesn't have to elaborate on questions, then there's less things for her to worry about down the road when she has to think, like in trial 4 or trial 5, what did I say in KD1 versus KD2 versus Charlie's trial versus what did I tell Detective Isom during that handful of hours where he could ask me all sorts of questions versus what did I say on that stupid writing podcast versus, like the less is more. Silence is golden for Wendi at this point. So she'll definitely jump at the life rope if you offer her a way out of any of these questions. When it's convenient to her, she'll definitely accept your formulation or adopt your language whenever possible so that it reduces her linguistic footprint on the record. As I mentioned a little bit in the other video, Wendi's not a dummy. She's not on the wire like her brother and her mom. She's a lot more disciplined, and I think she's going to be a lot harder to catch. So you have to, I think, analyze what little clues that we do have that she's left. It pays to be organized when analyzing somebody so thorough and calculated as Wendi. So now we move on to 5 minutes and 2 seconds. George asks, did you know Dan Markel?
And did you know Dan Markel?
Yes, I did.
And I really appreciate the formulation of George's questions. She mixes things up enough to where she can have her witnesses be in a rhythm if it suits her, but if she wants to kind of keep them off base and make it so that they have to actually kind of think about it because she formulates it in a different way. We'll see that in a couple different times coming up here, but I can just tell that these questions are very thoughtfully arranged. So, did you know Dan Markel? It's a departure from were you a member of the Florida Bar at that time to did you know Dan Markel? I mean, that is a pretty big change up there. And it's it strikes me as a very competent, efficient, smart question. And of course, Wendi says, yes, I did know Dan Markel 5 minutes and 5 seconds. How did you know Mr. Markel? He was my husband.
How did you know Mr. Markel?
He was my husband.
Robo Wendi is enraging at times. This is what I wrote in my notes. She makes me want to find a primal screaming instructor and run off into the wilderness like a crazy person. She's worse than a bad ex. It's terrible. It's like I want her to stop talking, but I keep pressing play on the YouTube screen. I cannot help myself. Those are my notes. Yeah. Also interesting in this answer here, when she answers, he was my husband, it was she has a slight flash of disbelief that Georgia would even ask her this question and a little bit of upspeak too. It's at this point that I want to mention that Wendi's accent is really reminding me of it took me a while to try to place it, but I'm now I totally got it, and it's from that goddamn SNL skit, The Californians, where she's just it's the most annoying, over enunciated. Did you take the 405 to Calawanga? It just drives me nuts. I don't know what it is about the way that she talks, but it's so nasally and annoying. Yeah, but she really reminds me of, I'm trying to think of what the actress's name is, but she's really great. Now I gotta look it up. Who is it? Kristen Wiig. Yeah, that's who she really reminds me of, Kristen Wiig's accent in The Californians. Oof.
What are you doing here?
Stuart, why are you home so early?
I skipped Wilshire and took Beverly over to Santa Monica and took that all the way up.
Okay, so then at 5:08, when did you meet him? So this is interesting. So back to back, it's how did you know Mr. Markel? When did you meet him? So we're asking how did you know a person, and then switching it from how to when. So instead of that sort of same series of concentrating on nouns, and we concentrate temporally on the time period, that shift gets Wendi's eyes to go up and to the right, her left, I guess. There's a few different times where we see that happening where you can tell she's really trying to think of what her answer should be.
When did you meet him?
We met in 2004.
I don't think Wendi was expecting this formulation of when did you meet him, so it takes Wendi's programming must run some numbers real quick to think for what should we say for minimally viable answer for when, the year, right? What is the least we can say? We can just say the year, right? We met in 2004. That's what Wendi comes up with. Wendi wanted it to sound like a lot more substantial answer, but she only said 4 words. 5 minutes and 17 seconds. And when did you marry?
And when did you marry?
We married in 2006.
We married in 2006. Bleep, blop, bloop. 2006. 5 minutes, 28 seconds.
Did you ever live in Tallahassee?
I did live in Tallahassee.
Did you ever live in Tallahassee? I love how Georgia says Tallahassee. It's just like it was made from the heavens to be said by a southern accent. You ever live in Tallahassee? I can't do accents. I suck at accents. I still try, but I can't do them. Wendi a lot of times comes in pretty hot. Like you can just see the concentration. There's like a mask of concentration on Wendi's face a lot of times, and I think people have really commented on her facial expressions because I think she's been coached to sort of cock her head to look innocent or like she's sort of being neutral or thoughtfully considering the question, and her lips are slightly pursed, and it's like she's like spent thousands of hours looking at herself in the mirror trying to formulate the mathematically perfect way to look like an innocent victim on the stand. But again, it's sort of like people sense that not everybody's like you, Wendi, and not everybody's Patrick Bateman in a fucking wig and a dress there, Wendi, so we don't all think like you. It was like right here I had some notes in my spreadsheet about, I made some notes about how it looked like Wendi was like an athlete in a tennis match where, she was like trying to break her opponent's serve, and she was just so focused on what was going on in the middle foreground, trying to find any little visual scrap of information that would help her return her opponent's volley or serve. And of course, Wendi says, I did live in Tallahassee. 5 minutes, 31 seconds. When did you first move to Tallahassee? And Georgia just kind of gives it to her right back. The rhythm of this is really interesting. It's like, we're only like a few seconds in between each question and answer here, so this is back and forth real quick.
When did you first move to Tallahassee?
We moved to Tallahassee in the fall, August of 2005, and we lived in Tallahassee that academic year, so from 2005 until the summer of 2006. And then we spent a year living in Miami from 2006 to 2007. And then I lived back in Tallahassee from 2007 to 2014.
See, this can be a tricky bounce again from narrative sequence of this, then this, then this, to this, then when was this, to then, to when was that? Like, that's, I think, kind of what Georgia's doing, is thinking about the way that she breaks up questions so that it's not just she's not just asking like, what about this noun? What about that noun? What about this noun? But instead she's asking questions about things, and then questions about time periods, and questions about people, and kind of just trying to break it up so that she keeps Wendi on her toes. She wants Wendi to have to, actually sort of think about things and give more of a response. So that's one of the central tensions here. One of the little tennis balls, if you will, metaphorical tennis balls that's being rallied is it going to be a long response, or is it going to be a short response? How short can I make the response? How long can I draw you out? So far, Wendi has succeeded in a sense to staying very short in her questions, but it's making her look really weird and bad. I think the jury already must have a sense, even though we're a minute in at this point, that the tension is very thick in this back and forth. So, and then we get, again, a hard look up to the right. We move to Tallahassee and it's like she's racking her brain to say, in 2000, the fall, August of 2004, upspeak, like she's unsure. Part of the context of like Wendi giving testimony in these trials is like, yes, she's had to care for the kids. I mean, but she also, Donna's probably been raising those kids for the most part. Let's be serious, right? But she really hasn't had a job since the murders, right? She's been sort of a kept woman by the insurance money and God knows what else. Doesn't need to work. So, I think that she's spent an ungodly amount of time going back over certain things in her mind. I can only imagine, because she is, after all, a narcissist and a control freak, I think, on some level. I think that's hard to dispute. And if there's one thing I know about them is, like Jeffrey Lacoste said, the one thing that Wendi hates is when somebody points out that Wendi isn't perfect, right? And there's a lot of things about this case that must really bug her because they didn't work out perfectly. Now Wendi has to ask questions about, when did you first move to Tallahassee, Wendi? She doesn't fucking want to answer because that means she has to talk about her and her Danny Markel husband that she hates and wanted to obliterate and did everything in her power to make go away. So yeah, we moved to Tallahassee in the fall, August of 2005, I think. Who cares? That's the subtext that I get. Think I'm reading a little too much into it? No, I think I'm not reading enough. This fucking chick is crazy. She's been living and reliving that divorce and that marriage because she conspired to murder her ex-husband because it was so playing over and over and over again in her head. That's why she had to get rid of Dan Markel, is because it permanent reminders with those two boys that Wendi wasn't perfect and that she screwed up by marrying this guy that she tells herself that she never loved. That's one version of events. Who even knows what she really believes? But yeah, my bet is that Wendi has thought more about this case than anyone else. And she knows it very well. So don't let her fool you for a minute. She probably knows the day and hour that they first moved to Tallahassee and when she left. She was right on top of this case after it happened, trying to control the narrative, cash out the insurance settlements, deal with every minor detail, she was doing stuff like trying to get involved in the GoFundMe payments as the widow. She was all over the place when it came to $5 that might go to Wendi Adelson, or anything that meant anything in terms of the way this thing appears in the media. You can bet that she's doing everything she can reasonably to influence it. 6 minutes and 3 seconds. Why did you move to Tallahassee for the first time? Good question.
Why did you move to Tallahassee the first time?
The first time we moved to Tallahassee for Danny's job. He got a job at FSU Law School.
The first time we moved to Tallahassee, Wendi starts adopting George's formulation again, was for Danny's job. He got a job at FSU Law School. 6 minutes, 11 seconds.
All right, and what about the second time?
And the second time we moved back to Tallahassee because he had tried to get a job at University of Miami Law School and it didn't work out.
All right. And what about the second time? Again, a hard look right, her left, I guess. And then the second time we moved back to Tallahassee because he had tried to get a job at the University of Miami Law School and it didn't work out. It's by far the most in-depth answer we've gotten out of Wendi so far. She didn't really borrow very much of George's phrasing. It's also worth commenting here that Wendi, in a lot of these trials, tries to make it seem like Danny was the one that was totally in charge of everything that was happening with where they were moving and all this sort of thing. I don't know that that's exactly necessarily accurate, that Wendi was just a casual observer that didn't have any say in things. I don't think that that's how it went down, but I've also heard that Wendi performed so poorly at her spousal hire job at University of Miami, that's part of the reason why they didn't get hired on there. So I think the story's a little bit more complicated than that, but for the purposes of this opening questioning in the case, yeah, fine, whatever. 6 minutes, 24 seconds. So both times it was for his employment. Yes.
So both times it was for his employment?
Yes.
6 minutes and 26 seconds. So we are under 2 minutes in and we get our first whopper, like inarguable whopper. There's just no way to sugarcoat this one. I think this is pretty clear-cut perjury. 6 minutes, 26 seconds. Did you like living in Tallahassee? The other thing that I want to note here before we get to Wendy's answer is notice the power of a good, concise question. So many times people ask questions and it's like so painful, like they can't let it get out of their mouth before they want to ask another question. And it's like sometimes as an interviewer, it's so much better to just ask a good question and then sit back and actively listen and see where the question takes you. You know, and especially like in a prosecution where somebody like Georgia, it's very high stakes in a murder case. Somebody's life is on the line in terms of the defendant's sentence. And so, you know, people want to be prepared. And so a lot of times prosecutors spend tons of time coming up with questions, but sometimes you get an answer to a question and it just sends you in a direction. And it's such a unique, I think you kind of have to appreciate here how tough Georgia's job is with Wendi on the stand. Like, she doesn't want to beat her up too bad or get too much into the weeds because of her use and derivative use immunity. And so, like, she doesn't want Wendi to, like, say, it's of questionable use for Wendi to say stuff that's, like, really damning to Wendi herself, you know, because you can't end up reusing that in, like, case down the line. So it's like best case scenario, I think, for Georgia is to just get Wendi to, you know, tell whoppers, and then, you know, Georgia, instead of trying to like interrogate it and like nail the jury over the head with how full of Wendi obviously is, sometimes, like, you know, because it's so much thornier to get into the weeds with somebody like Wendi who has immunity issues because she's an unindicted co-conspirator, sometimes you just kind of want to let it hang out there. So when Wendi tells a big whopper, instead of trying to confront her and be like, oh really, like that's what you're gonna say, you know, you kind of just have to just be like, okay, wow, sure. You just kind of have to let the jury know how you feel from the context of your other questions. And so in this one, 6 minutes, 26 seconds, it's a very good question because it gets to the core of the motive in this case. Wendi didn't like living in Tallahassee. We know that. Donna hated it maybe even more. Like, not only because of the inconvenience and the fact that she didn't like the city itself. That was her own personalization of it. The real reason was because she didn't have any control in Tallahassee. Her life wasn't in her own hands. Her destiny was in the hands of Danny Markel. So she hated being in Tallahassee. She hated everything about it. And if you listen to Jeffrey Lacasse or other people that knew her around that time that are not totally biased in her favor, not part of her family or something like that, willing to tell the truth, they'll tell you that she hated Tallahassee, and it was one of the main topics of conversation that she had right before the murder. So this question, while seemingly innocuous and small, did she like being in Tallahassee? It seems like a who gives a carrots type question in most situations. In this case, it is material. It really is, because it was in her divorce filing. It's been documented heavily in courts. You know, so it's not something that's really, you know, we're just basing it on the word of others. It's also in the divorce file. You know, she went through the expense of litigating that very issue. So when she says, when George asks her at 6 minutes and 26 seconds, did you like living in Tallahassee? Wendi says, I did. And that's number one. She just perjured herself, I believe. That is BS. Right afterwards, Georgia gives, again, a nice little sotto voce. All right. You know, that's just like the subtle way that Georgia indicates to the jury, this bitch is crazy. It's about as clear as a lie as possible, given the context. Clear a lie as possible. I mean, it's not a trivial matter. There's extensive court file documenting her issues with Tallahassee and her spending probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to litigate the issue to try to get out. It being denied with prejudice. And that being really on the timeline of this case where everything started to snowball into Danny Markel was such a problem, he had to go. There were no other conventional means to get Wendi out of Tallahassee once that court dismissed her petition to relocate with prejudice. This is a 10 out of 10 lie. I hate to break the scale so early, but this is simply a blatant falsehood, in my opinion. Full stop.
Okay. Did you like living in Tallahassee?
I did.
All right.
6 minutes and 29 seconds.
And did you live on Trescott Drive?
We did.
And did you live on Trescott Drive? Again, we get Wendi's eyes dart. Something's weird here. I think she's sort of formulating, like, does she really need to say that's where she lived? Is she going to take issue with the form of the question? Like, Wendy's thinking, yeah, I did live on Trescott Drive, sort of, when it was like a pod person who was controlling me during my marriage to that weirdo Dan Markel, that guy I hate now. She's like, I've since regained total control of my faculties, but yeah, I managed to overcome the insane injustice of being trapped in a loveless marriage to a gross dude. That version of Wendi is like a character in a novel at this point. It's like a bad dream. So in a sense, I think Wendy's like, did I really live on Trescott? I don't know. I guess I'll accept that, just because she doesn't want to even, look like more of a snotty jerk. So yeah. She did live on Trescott, but also she didn't, because her heart was never really in the marriage, and she never loved Dan Markel. So none of it really meant anything other than the 2 children, who are Adelsons now anyway, so there's very little record of Danny Markel in the memory banks of Wendi Jill Adelson, attorney at law. But yeah, we did. 6 minutes and 37 seconds. This question is mostly inaudible, as Georgia seems to be moving away from the mic and I think trying to introduce something into evidence or publish something, but the question ends with Georgia saying something about here in Tallahassee, and I think it's basically her asking if this was her home here in Tallahassee, showing a picture of the house on Trescott, and Wendi agrees and basically says, yes, that was our home. 6 minutes and 43 seconds. And where are you from, Mrs. Adelson?
And where are you from, Ms. Adelson?
I'm from Broward County originally.
And Wendi answers, I'm from Broward County originally. And it's like, even in little things like this, it's like, I don't know, why can't she just say she's from Miami? Or it's like everything she can do to shade things to where she, I don't know, just doesn't want to appear like she comes from money, or I don't know what she wants to be more relatable. Like, is she really from Broward County? It would be interesting to know what people from the area think of when somebody says they're from Broward County, because it's like, I'm not from Florida. I've never been there before, but I don't really know. Never really heard anybody say they're from Broward County. In fact, when I was thinking about this, like, Broward County, what does he even know Broward County from? And I was like, oh, isn't that where XXX Tentacion, the SoundCloud rapper guy that was murdered in his car, isn't that where he was from? And it's like, yeah, I looked it up. He was killed in Deerfield Beach in Broward County. And so it's like Broward County's like kind of like in the Miami metro, or the Miami-Dade metroplex. It's like a bunch of different cities in that area, but it's like, I don't know, that just seemed like too cute to me to say she comes from Broward County, and it fits with the larger pattern of her going way out of her way to try to say things that make her seem less bougie. Maybe she wants to be more relatable. I don't know, but it's just very weird. I don't know. I don't know how much of this I want to call it a lie, because I don't really know the Florida geography that well, but you are not keeping it real, Miss Wendi. How you doing?
How you doing?
Fucking Wendi. Okay, 6:49. Okay, do you have family members in Broward currently? And this is, I think, a great example of Georgia thinking on her feet, being an active listener, because I guarantee you this wasn't on her board. She wasn't like, okay, so here Wendy's going to say, yeah, I'm from Broward County. She's like, but Georgia's like, huh, that's interesting. Okay, so do you have any family members in Broward currently?
Okay, and do you have family members in Broward currently?
I have one family member in Broward.
Georgia's, again, great, calm, measured approach here. Active listening, hearing the answer, asking a good, concise question based on the answer. Like, you want to say you live in Broward, huh? Like, you have family members, I guess, there? Or like you live there for 5 minutes when you're 2 years old? And she's like, yes, I have one family member in Broward. Beep, minimal information, quantity has been reached. Bloop. 7 minutes. Where do you live currently, if you could just tell us? I live in Miami-Dade County.
Where do you live currently? Or you can just tell us.
I live in Miami-Dade County.
Yeah, you live in Miami, okay? You live in an obscenely expensive place in a fabulous zip code, and I would bet a few quid that your home is worth as much as all 12 jurors' homes combined. Given then that some of them probably rent, you'd probably need to lay odds for me to even bet on Wendi, because she is orders of magnitude wealthier than everybody else in the court. But she wants to say she lives in Broward. Yeah, okay, gotcha, Wendi. Yeah, so she answers, in Miami-Dade County. Yeah, okay, gotcha. You live on South Beach. You live in an incredibly expensive building. It's just so fascinating watching Wendi squirm, and I think one of the reasons why people that are people are so into this case is because it's one of the few times in modern America where the wealthy have been held to account for their repugnant behavior. So you actually get to watch some rich people have to answer for their bad behavior. It just so happens to be this sort of nouveau riche, no account family. You know, it's not like somebody that really runs things, but they are especially loathsome and stupid and flagrant in their criminality, greed, and entitlement. So it is a little bit of a nice diversion for me to watch them have to squirm a little bit. 7 minutes and 6 seconds. And what about your parents? Where do they live?
And what about your parents? Where do they live?
They currently live in Miami-Dade County.
They currently live in Miami-Dade County. Oh, they live in Miami too. Weird. So when you said you live in Broward, what was that all about again? It's just a little thing, but I'm sure, I imagine that Wendi spending a few extra moments on that means a lot more for people from Florida than it does for this guy living up in Alaska. But even I can read the tea leaves enough to see, yeah, you don't live in Broward, do you? 7 minutes and 11 seconds. All right, and what about your brother, Charles Adelson?
All right, and what about your brother, Charles Adelson?
He lives in Broward County.
And Wendi again coming in hot right on top of George's question again. He lives in Broward County. Oh, Charles lives in Broward County. Okay. 7 minutes, 16 seconds. And do you have any children? Wendi again right on top. I do.
And do you have any children?
I do.
Doesn't even want to volunteer like, yes, I do. I have 2 boys. You just really don't want to keep this thing rolling, do you? You want to just be like a dead body and sit there limp and have Georgia have to haul you around like a fetch quest non-player character in that annoying mission where you have to keep the rescued hostages alive and keep wandering off into the line of fire like a bird brain, and you're like, no, don't go over there, Wendi, let me save you again because you don't know what the heck you're doing. Yeah, you have children, Wendi. You've got 2 boys, 7-19. How many children do you have? I love the way that Georgia just a slight little, and how many children do you have? I have 2 children. Wendi, I can sense, is angry at this point. She just has like that taut expression. 7 minutes, 21 seconds.
And how many children do you have?
I have 2 children.
What are their ages?
They are 10 and 8, turning 9 soon.
What are their ages? The tension very thick here. They are 10 and calculating, eyes going up to the, darting up to the right/left again, and 8, turning 9 soon. Had to make sure you didn't screw that one up, right, Wendi? 7 minutes, 27 seconds. Okay, both boys? Both boys.
Okay, both boys?
Both boys.
Nod. 7 minutes, 31 seconds. And both the biological children of Dan Markel? Yes. Nod.
And both the biological children of Dan Markel?
Yes.
7 minutes, 42 seconds. How are your family members employed? Specifically your parents and your brother. This question, there's so much in here. Just like the way that Wendi speaks, like at some points, like certain words she was saying, like just went on for like pages in my mind because of how strange it was. But she says, so the question again is, how are your family members employed, specifically your parents and your brother?
Are your family members employed, specifically your parents and your brother?
My mom is not currently working very much. She helps out with my dad's office. My dad is a dentist, and my brother Charlie is a periodontist.
My mom, Squints, is not little sort of like scrunched up face of disgust. One other thing that's interesting about trying to like evaluate Wendi's facial expressions and body language is that she's had a lot of plastic surgery done to her face, I think, and a lot of Botox, so there's not a lot of movement there. Like you can kind of see it like sometimes when her forehead moves in an especially contorted position, and it's like part of her forehead is like sitting there like a plate, like it's like motionless, like it's almost like her plastic face is like a mask, it almost has like a shield-like quality to it. But yeah, it's like her expression sometimes don't really register unless it's like really intense, and then you see it and it's like her face is like gnarled into like a rictus mask. It's kind of intense. And you see it here in the beginning of this answer as she's like really concentrating. It's like, how are your family members employed? Like, how much does she want to say here? Like, remember, she's trying to get out of here with like saying as few words as possible, and she really doesn't want to talk about her family and money. She seems really weird about that subject. So she says, my mom squints, really doesn't want to talk about mom, do you? Is not currently working. She's also thinking, I think here, be careful what you say about mom, because you're going to have to justify what you say later to mom when she bitches at you on the phone or in person when she finally button hooks you and gets to talk to you about the case. And even though she knows that you don't want to talk to her about the case at all because you don't want to end up going to jail for her dumbass. Okay.
My mom is not currently working very much.
So my mom is not currently working, upspeak, very much. The word much sounds just like, she has the weirdest nasally, her voice seems to emanate from the strangest, like, center of her head or something. She's very weird sounding. Maybe I've been listening to too much Wendi, but I really noticed it, that she has like this nasally, choppy effect when I heard it slowed down for the first time in the Wendy's TV series by Grish, and it really crystallized for me there how weird her voice is.
So that means that anything you say today can't be used against you if the state decides to arrest you later on.
The state isn't going to decide to arrest me.
No, it's like I can't hear it the same anymore. Like one syllable will carry out into like multiple. Like, my mom's not currently working very much. She helped out with my dad's office, and it's like, again, the Californians over enunciation of every syllable. And when she's saying my dad's office, it's like dad is like 3 or 4 syllables. My dad's office. It's really weird. And then my dad is a dentist. It's like she's slithering like a snake. She has like a selective lisp. It's very weird.
My dad is a dentist, and my brother Charlie is a periodontist.
And then she says, and my brother Charlie is a periodontist. Okay. And, wow, I think that's kind of enough for one video as like a start. Tell me if you guys like the format. It's a lot of fun for me to like super way over analyze Wendi and her answers and whether or not she's lying. Obviously she's lying. She's lying about everything except for the things that it's not possible to lie about. Yeah. So anyway, if you think this is a good format, let me know. I'd be interested to hear your suggestions for different maybe gimmicks or little fun game shows we can play, ways of mixing it up. But yeah, I just really loved over-analyzing Wendi's testimony. I could just keep going, do chunks from each trial. The other thing I'm thinking about doing is like trying to think of like another good subject like the celebration dinner. There's a bunch of different little like, vertical slices that I could do where I could see what Wendi said about something in every all 3 trials, or there's a million of them, but this is just a little experiment for a format for a video that I thought might be fun. So, all right, well, thanks for checking it out. Please subscribe if this is something you're into. Thanks, bye.